Before we get started with today's interview, just a quick reminder, click the thumbs up, make sure you subscribe and ding the bell so that you don't miss any of the great interviews that we have coming up. Now, on to today's interview. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited to introduce my special guest. Today, I have with me Scott Price, a composer with Tom Giroux Music. Welcome, Scott.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Sam. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you for being here with us. So I want to begin by asking you a little bit about your journey as a composer. So did you come from a musical family?
Yes, in a lot of ways I did. Although I'm the only professional musician in my family, my sister was 6 years older and she played the piano. And then, lots of my cousins and extended family, they all play instruments. And I remember, of course, we all were in the choirs and the bands and things, but I remember at family gatherings, rather than put on some music on the radio or on the CD player, or they would all just kind of pull out their guitars and sit around, and they preferred to make music themselves, which is great because you just see everybody around you always making music. And I think that had a real uplifting influence on me.
How cool that making music was part of the social fabric of your upbringing and your family's life. How did you get started composing?
Well, this is a little embarrassing to tell, but I remember when I was probably around 7 or 8, there was this little piece that I wrote called Frog on a Lily Pad. It was probably somewhere around 5 measures because I didn't quite know what time signatures meant then, but it just had a little few notes and some lyrics that went along with it. And then I've always just composed for myself. I just never put it out there for anybody. And then when I really started doing a lot of composing, and especially work for young people, was during COVID because we had extra time and I had extra time to improvise and do things. So that's when I really kind of sat down and started heavily getting into it.
Oh, that's really cool that you took that time that we all had during COVID and turned it into something productive and creative and wonderful. You mentioned a moment ago improvisation. Would you say that your compositional process begins mostly from improvisation, or is there a different way?
Oh, I think it's different for everybody. And in my mind, whatever works for somebody is what works. I'm a big believer in improvisation, and all of my pre-college students are required to improvise and learn how to do it in their lessons. They're required to do it on the recitals. And then I teach a graduate seminar in the pedagogy of improvisation from beginning to advanced levels. And so that's how all of my pieces truly begin, is I just sit down and start improvising, and there's an idea that sort of emerges, and then all the rest of those things come into play as it works itself out.
Oh, very cool. So besides improvising, what else kind of inspires you to compose?
I think at the heart of it are just my students. I think they're the most inspiring people in my life. So I have this personal philosophy that when a student is on the piano bench in my office, they are the teacher, I am the student. Of course, I don't tell them that, but I always think, what are you going to teach me today? And so a lot of that inspiration comes from them, how they see the world and what they're doing and what they enjoy and what things they struggle with and, what they're going to need a little further along or down that journey.
I love your openness and your focus on being in the moment with your students and asking yourself, what do they need from me today? That is awesome. Clearly the mark of a really, really excellent teacher.
Oh, that's very kind.
Who nurtured you as a composer and helped you to become the composer you are today?
Oh, gosh. I just think it's all the teachers around me. I've been very fortunate to have teachers who never closed doors on me. They just always said, oh, why don't you just keep doing that? Or what if you think about this? Or why don't you just go ahead and try this? So that's how I got into teaching primarily, because I had a teacher who just said, well, this semester we had to figure out some problems. So, you really thought about that and you might be a good teacher. And then, nobody ever judged the compositions as well. They just said, keep writing. And then, of course, a partnership that I have with Tom Giroux. Tom has been so helpful and so encouraging. And that's just been a wonderful friendship to develop.
I had the pleasure of interviewing Tom on Friday, and I have taught and loved his music for years, but had never had the pleasure of seeing him at a clinic or at a convention. And I am just overwhelmed by what an awesome person he is and how personable he is. And it was just such a fun interview. It was just the best. It was wonderful. So you're so fortunate to be working with somebody who is so awesome. Just so cool. So what are the things that challenged you to become a better composer?
I think just trying to solve problems. I just sort of look at what's coming out of the improvisations or what's going down on paper. I think about my students, and I just think we have problems to solve as pianists and musicians. And so I just want to take my turn to try and solve that problem and see if I can do it the best that I can. It doesn't mean it's better than anybody else. I just took my turn at it. So I'll often sit down and just say, well, what if I could only write a piece that used seconds? How would I do that? And how could that help a student? And how could it prepare them for something that's going to come down the line? And so just things like that challenge me to be better. And I know that if I'm having an idea and I'm having to really work on it and work it out, I know it's not going to be good. So we just put that aside.
We all have a few of those, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
But I think knowing part of when you've turned down that alley that's going to be a blind alley and being able to say, okay, we just need to turn back around. That's good maturity as a composer. You alluded to it a moment ago, but what role do restrictions play in your composing?
Certainly they play a lot in my composing, a big role, because if you're writing at the elementary level, they're just things that you really can't do because the student hasn't encountered that yet in their method books or in their curriculum of study. And so those parameters, I think, are very important for me. And certainly, what I did a long time ago when I was doing recordings, I was lucky enough to sort of play through and learn an entire piano method, not just sight read, but really learn the pieces, study them, and then perform them up for a recording level. And I think that was a really, really good education for me in learning what a level is. And then I try to keep that in mind as much as possible when I'm composing. It doesn't mean that you can't stretch things a little bit here and there. And that's where the people around me are important because they can say, well, measure 5 is great, but... And then maybe we have to adjust some things. And I try to be as open to that as possible.
I love that openness. And as someone who teaches composition, occasionally I encounter students who are resistant to the idea of changing anything in their composition. So give us some insight. When you write something that is going to be published, typically, how many revisions do you go through? How many editorial comments do you get?
Well, I would be embarrassed for you to see the initial thing that goes down during the improvisation process because it's worse than chicken scratches. And so often while it's fresh in my mind, I'll play it into my phone just so that I have a really good working sound copy of it. And then I run to my desk and I create a copy that I can send off to whoever it's going to. The level process, that gets worked out when I'm creating the copy that needs to go to the publisher. And then there's always that little bit of back and forth, just saying, well, this is great, but, this really doesn't happen in the level of a method at level 2. So I think we need to smooth out measure 8 and number 9. And I'm fine with that because in the end, it's all about the student for me. And I want to create something that's really going to best serve them. And so I'm pretty much free to open to changes as they need to be made. Sometimes not, but that's a discussion we have.
I love that you are open to the idea of changing, and I love that you shared that part of your creative process is improvising and then making recordings of that improvisation on your phone and then going to notation. So those insights into your creative process, I think, are so valuable and really, really interesting and exciting to students and teachers who compose. So thank you for sharing that. That is super awesome. What are some of the attributes that you feel help people to become successful composers?
Well, I think it's curiosity and not being afraid to just try something. Because it's all successful, whether you take that trial forward or not, it is up to you, but you tried something. And I think that comes from my students. And if anybody knows me, they probably know me in the context of teaching students with autism and other special needs or neurodiversities. And we do a lot of celebrating of trying, because if they tried, that's a success. I don't care if it fell apart, it was still a success. And so I try to build an environment around my students where they feel safe trying, and that even if it didn't work out, it was still a success because at least they tried. And every trial gets you a little further down the road, you know.
That is a really cool, welcoming attitude. And I think it must really build a sense of trust between you and your students. And so they're willing to take some risks in your studio. If you teach composition, how do you get your students started composing?
Not all of my students can approach composition because my entire pre-college class are students who are on the spectrum. And so for those that are interested in it and who can do it, we usually just start by putting a couple of notes together and showing them how to write it down on the page, because part of their learning process is learning sometimes how to effectively hold a pencil with their fine motor skill delays, and then how to write things on the paper as well. So we work a lot about that and a lot of practicing on that. And then how to put notes together. And then maybe we only work on one measure a week. And I'm always saying, do you have questions? Let me answer your question, because they always have dozens of questions and it's my job to answer it. And then we just start adding complexity. And a lot of this for me stems out of improvisation. I want them to already have an aural awareness of the patterns of sounds that they might use. And I want them to know how those equate with the black and white key patterns on the keyboard and how their hand fits that. So that by the time we're writing it down, they already have a vocabulary of sounds and patterns that they can work with. We just say, okay, this is what they look like on paper.
How do you avoid some of the pitfalls which seem to entrap many composers, getting past the original blank page and, on the other side of that, starting a million things but finishing nothing?
We all have some projects on our desk like that, don't we? Well, I think some of the pitfalls that are just holes in my own education. Like I'm spending a lot of time with the Fuchs counterpoint book right now because I need to be a lot better at counterpoint. I need to understand that better. And really, it's just things that my students have said to me. It's just, oh, try again. It's all right. Try again. Or tomorrow's a better day. Try again tomorrow. And so if I get frustrated, there's no harm done in just putting it aside and coming back to it a week later or tomorrow or whenever. Usually the answer is on the page. I'm just looking too hard to see it. And the honesty is right there on the page. It's got to tell me whether it's good or not.
Oh, that's a really cool, insightful answer. I love that. So how did you connect with your publishers?
Tom specifically, I had known Tom for years. You know, he's been in the business for over 30 years. And so I had known Tom going way back through my work with Alfred and some other publishers. And then during COVID, that is when I really began to put the autism book together on paper. And I just saw that Tom had started his company, and I knew Tom and I trusted Tom. And so I just sent him a copy of the manuscript. So what do you think? Would you be interested? And Tom was interested. And really, I think we signed a contract maybe in late September, and the book was out by the 1st of February.
Wow.
And Tom, what kind of deal is this? Tom really didn't change a word of content in the book. He helped me with some, grammar and editorial things, but the content he did not change, and I bless him for that.
Well, but it's also a testament to your skill and craft and level of knowledge as an author that you had written something that was already so complete and in such a good place already by the time it went to the publisher.
Well, it's always nice to know that people appreciate your work, and I respected Tom a lot, and so I was really glad that he saw value in it.
What advice do you have for aspiring young composers who are hoping to emulate your success?
I say improvise, improvise, improvise. Don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to try things, ever. We're all going to hear judgments. And, be your own best judge. And then just keep writing. Keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. And write for yourself and find your own voice.
That leads me perfectly into my next question. As I sight read through all of your pieces last night, I was struck by there's a phenomenal diversity of sounds and styles, but there's a certain thread that runs through it. These pieces are uniquely yours. How did you go about finding your unique sound as a composer?
Oh, I think it all goes back to the I word, improvisation, over and over. I don't know if I should be embarrassed about this, but I have a TikTok, and every morning I post a little 2 to 3 minute improvisation on there. And so I'm doing it every day and trying things out. As far as the sound of the music, I think it's really, again, it's what I learned from music learning theory. And that the research strongly suggests that students who are acquiring their repertoire of aural patterns, they need a huge variety of meters, rhythms, harmonic patterns, keys, melodic patterns. And I try to stretch the elementary sort of palette and the intermediate palette to include a lot of those things that will hopefully support the later levels of study and the more advanced pieces. So if I write a piece, I think, is this really going to help a student later on? And I've been asked this question before about personal style. And my answer is always, if you really listen to it, it's just a big combination of Scriabin and 80s pop music. That's what
I love that. That's a cool combination. That's really, really fun.
Might date me a little bit, but there it is.
Oh, that's perfectly good. It's you. It's your unique sound. And that's what I think teachers love about teaching your music, is that it's relatable. It's great. So what are some of the biggest challenges that are faced by composers today?
In a way, the changes in the publishing arena have really affected composers, I think. But at the same time, there are so many more venues to get your work out there. Of course, then you have to hustle and be the person who's promoting it and everything. But with the internet, you can put up, a PDF copy of your music in however length, or to protect it in whatever way you want. You can put up a recording, you can put up a video about how you might teach it or how you play it. So there's a lot more that you can build around content with a piece. Challenges also, of course, judgment is always a challenge. It's who you are, and somebody's judging your work. I think it's good for a student to be able to build a kind of semi-transparent wall where the good judgment that I need to hear can come in, but the ones that aren't relevant are heard, but they don't come in and affect this, because this is what it is in the end, I think.
Absolutely. That is super helpful. You've mentioned in the course of our conversation that you do multiple things, that you are teaching, that you are composing, that you are performing, that you've made recordings. And so you have this multifaceted career. What are your thoughts about that? I've heard from so many composers that they kind of cobble together a living doing multiple things. Is this something that you celebrate, or is it something that you feel like, oh, I wish I could just focus on one or two things?
Oh, I think it's just like life. It's a juggling act. And sometimes you have to put more energy into one thing than you do into another. And of course, here at the university, I have all of my teaching duties and research supervision and things like that. But I realize that I'm extremely fortunate to be able to do what I am able to do. And so I don't forget that blessing every day. But then I always tried to tell myself early on in my study, just like, this is what a musician does. And it's what it's always been like. If you go clear back into Bach and before, and if you look at everybody else who's come up, they all have these multifaceted careers, and those are the musicians who are able to make a go at it. And I always just kind of held up Liszt and Busoni as sort of my personal models, because, Titanic pianists, composers, writers, teachers, conductors, and I think Franz Liszt's administrative and bureaucratic ability is often overlooked.
I love your attitude of gratitude, and I also love that historic perspective that you're able to see, wait a minute, this is just kind of what we do as musicians. This is how we have come to be. That's just super cool.
I always tell my graduate students that it's a skill set. It's not one thing. It's a skill set. Even people like, Martha Argerich, she's not just performing. She's doing performing in all of its facets. And she's coaching people, and she's doing some administrative things as well.
We just don't always see it.
Yeah, right.
Thank you so much for doing this.
No,
I'm
thank
so
you.
very, very grateful
It's a wonderful service, and I'm glad to do it. It's a lot of fun.